Well, welcome to the Cinnabar. Now, first I want to apologize to our regular viewers. We will get back to some more enjoyable episodes with some vintage firearms, both gunsmithing and shooting, in the near future. But today, it's December 8th, 2022, a date that will live in infamy, at least for Oregon gun owners. You see, there's been a lot happening, and today is the day that draconian Measure 114 was scheduled to become law. And heck, the election hasn't even been certified by the state yet. That's how fast they were trying to get this thing going. Now, if you remember, just a couple of days ago, I talked about the suits that have been filed in federal court that had asked for an injunction while this all played out. The judge had denied the injunction, although delayed just the permit to purchase part of it for 30 days. And we made an episode about that. And then later that day, a suit in in state court, in the circuit court level, and our wonderful neighbors next door in Hardin County, that judge did put a temporary restraining order on all the implementation of 114 across the state. Now, while that was a victory for our side, I really didn't expect it to go very far, because anything in state court will have to eventually go to the Supreme Court, the Oregon Supreme Court, which in the past has been ultra liberal. That court is mostly made up of Supreme Court justices who were appointed by our very liberal governors over the past years and then re-elected by our very liberal urban areas in the state. So for those of us in Oregon, we remember just recently during the COVID crisis when our governor put in just draconian restrictions over COVID. One of our circuit court judges over here on the east side had put in a restraining order against those measures, and that was struck down almost immediately by the Supreme Court on an emergency basis. And we really kind of expected that to happen with this ruling out of Harney County, but we're surprised and ecstatic that while the Oregon Attorney General took this to the Oregon Supreme Court immediately within a day to have them reverse the Harney County Circuit Court judge's decision, the Oregon Supreme Court rightly ruled that they would not reverse that decision. And the reasoning seems to be, from the legal scholars that I've been following, is that because this temporary restraining order just leaves in place the status quo, the laws as they already stand, it doesn't change anything, then they'll let that process proceed through the circuit court level, and eventually then it will almost assuredly end up at the Oregon Supreme Court. Now, what I don't think we can infer by that is that the Supreme Court looked at the suit on the merits of the case, but just on the process. So they're going to let the process go forward in the Harney County Circuit Court system, and then, like I say, almost assuredly it will end up at the Supreme Court level, and we'll see how that goes. Although, as I mentioned before, our Supreme Court has a history of extremely liberal decisions. Now, the temporary restraining order in Harney County. Now, most of you have probably heard of Harney County before. Just a short few years ago, we had they were in the national news quite a lot with the prison sentences for our fellow ranchers, the Hammond family, over some fires at their ranch. Then the Malheur National Wildlife takeover and the eventual, basically, assassination of Lavoy Finicum. So this time around, we're getting actually a little happier news out of Harney County, and certainly applaud that judge for his decision. But what this means now is that he's issued this temporary restraining order just until next Tuesday. So here we are on Thursday the 8th, so on the 13th, next Tuesday, there's going to be another hearing that he will decide whether to extend that and issue a preliminary injunction. So we're hopeful that will go forward, and the whole process will take place through that court, and the arguments will be made, and he will make a decision. Now, one of the things we have to keep in mind, that this suit being in Oregon court and bringing up the Oregon Constitution is a little bit different than the U.S. Constitution on the right to bear arms. So in Oregon, there's no ambiguity about whether it's an individual right. And of course, most of us believe, and the Supreme Court has ruled recently that that's what the U.S. Constitution says too, but it's much more clearly stated in the Oregon Constitution. And I'll read it to you here. The Oregon Constitution says, "The people shall have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and of the state." So first and foremost, it's a right to defend yourself. And secondly, to defend the state. Now it goes on to talk about the military shall be kept in strict subordination to the civil power. And we have to remember that the Constitution of Oregon was drafted when states raised regiments for the U.S. military. And of course, I'm sure there'll be gun control people that want to pick apart every word and every little nuance, just like they have the Second Amendment. But Oregon is very, very specific that this is a right to bear arms to defend yourself and the state of Oregon. So where do we go from here? Well, if I had to look into my crystal ball, I would suspect that the Harney County judge on Tuesday, when he hears the merits of the case, will go ahead and issue that preliminary injunction, putting a stay on this becoming law, at least till it goes through the process in his courtroom. Now, this thing obviously has some real constitutional issues with the wording of the Oregon Constitution, so it definitely has merits. Now, I would hope that we would get a favorable judgment when it goes through the whole process in Harney County. Inevitably, I think it's going to go to the Oregon Supreme Court, no matter which way the Harney County judge rules on it. And I'm not as enthusiastic about whatever they are going to rule. I mean, their past history has been very, very, very liberal. So at least we've got a reprieve from this becoming law while it goes through the state court system. And for how long that goes, you know, anybody's guess. The Supreme Court did leave the door open for the Oregon Attorney General to bring the case back to them at any time. So if things aren't proceeding the way they think they should be in Harney County, then they can go back and ask again for the Supreme Court to intercede. But hopefully this will take a while, give us a little breathing room. But ultimately, I don't think it will get past the Oregon Supreme Court, which puts us back to the federal court cases that are being handled in Portland. And of course, our first ruling by the federal judge there was not encouraging, especially the wording of her ruling, I'm told, made it sound very discouraging. Let's put it that way. So I think probably we're not going to get a favorable ruling ultimately by the judge in Portland. And again, it's probably going to go right on to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, who's got a history of pretty liberal, in fact, very liberal decisions in the past, although that's changed a little bit. The makeup of that court, that appeals court, has changed a little, and they've almost made a little sense over the last few years. And then I think ultimately it will make its way to the U.S. Supreme Court, where I think it has a very good chance. I think in the long haul, we might have won a battle here, and hopefully we can continue to win some battles, but I think the war is going to go on for quite a little while till ultimately it ends up all the way in the Supreme Court.